The mountains of central Utah have a rugged beauty. The people who settled the valleys they protect were attracted by that beauty, but also by the prospect of earning a living from the land. Many were brought to the area by the Mormon Church or by the railroads. They came to be farmers and ranchers, but they also came to be miners, to work in the coal mines that are hidden below the cliffs, and to dig the coal that warmed their homes, powered the train engines, and provided electricity to the West. These are proud people who understand very well the hard work and courage it takes to be a miner, as well as the camaraderie that defines the miners' lives underground.
I had a good life. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working. I miss the men more than I do anything. Friendship that you never lose.
And I love coal mining. Even though I loved it, I loved the men and best people in the world you ever meet in that mines.
This is something about coal mines. It's just a feeling that you have. That's where I needed to be.
It wasn't easy work, but it was good work. You know, it supported your family. Just something we do. This is what we love. This is what we do.
My dad was a coal miner. My grandfather was a coal miner. So I come from a family of coal miners. Carbon County was based on coal mining.
Carbon County is very unique to the rest of Utah. And it was the place where all the different ethnicities came for the railroad or for the mining. People of every denomination and every background.
It was a wonderful experience to grow up in the mining community. The town and the people were like their own little family. Everybody was friends and everybody did whatever they could to help each other.
It's a beautiful place, a good place to raise a family.
The community is very close. When you grow up in the mining community, you know from a very early age what can happen.
The Wilberg Mine and the Deer Creek Mine were starting to be put in as large facilities to mine the coal for the plants that had been constructed in Hunter and Huntington.
Wilberg was an excellent mine. It had good conditions, good people. The Wilberg was probably as good a mine as there was in the West.
I think it was one of the safest mines around. Everybody tried to do their part and tried to keep things safe. I never felt at risk in any day that I worked in the mine.
I felt Wilberg was a safe mine. I wouldn't have been there if I didn't feel safe. It was a good mine. It was a good producing mine.
Wilberg was unique, very unique. You had a lot of vertical relief in a quick hurry. Horizontal real estate was at a premium. The access to the coal seam sat above the valley floor nearly 800 or 900 feet. Once you got to the coal seam, you didn't have any room for facilities. The office and bathhouse and warehouse and an early shop actually was created in the coal seam.
There were two long walls in Wilberg, 13th right and 5th right.
The continuous miner develops long tunnels, and a long wall is set up and essentially traverses back and forth and removes that entire block of coal. The longwall mining process is much more productive. The roof collapses behind the shield to support the top. You're actually retreating and removing all of the coal.
If it just keeps caving until it finally levels itself out and it's caved solid, a gob, nobody ever goes back into it.
The shear is essentially, due to the design of the cutting drums, it moves the coals onto the pan line, and then the pan line transports the coal down along the face and dumps the coal onto what's called a stage loader, and then it's dumped directly onto the mine belt that takes the coal out of clear to the surface.
When you develop a longwall panel, you only have two entries. You have one with your belt and one with your intake. Your intake returns out the beltway. So your belt line there turns into a return as well as a neutral.
Wilberg, the layout into the 5th right section, it was different than most mining sections that I've been involved in. You traveled into the mine
and then you went under an overcast, and then you actually was traveling back out of the mine to get to the mouth of the fifth right section.
The entries are between 8 and 9 foot high and 20 foot wide. So the mains had 5. So you had 5 entries, and then the fifth right went off. It had 3, and then it went down to 2.
You connect entries, one to the other one. It's cut across to connect each one so that you're not too far away ahead of your air. Usually they're on 100 to 125 foot pillars, just a solid block of coal that is left there for support. We have to put stoppings in every so often. We have to put a man door in that's away from the intake or the neutral air into the intake or the return.
I was the longwall maintenance superintendent basically for, I think, 10 years. About 9 people would be a good crew. Probably 2 mechanics. You'd have 2 shear operators. You'd have a head gateman that ran the controls at the head gate. You'd probably have 3 prop men and 1 person on the tailgate, which was the gas watch. If you have a cribbing crew that's got a crib, as you come out and they got to build cribs in the entries to hold the entries open, generally they had 4 or 5 people.
In the fifth right section, the retreat on that had not been very far, maybe less than 700 or 800 feet.
I was the longwall coordinator over at Wilberg. We'd had a good year. We'd had a darn good year that year. Depending on your wall conditions and what have you, you can produce up to, 20, 30,000 ton a day or more. Miners have a lot of pride. To have a world's record, yeah, you was on top. That was going to be the first Wilberg.
Everybody was concentrating on mining and getting a record, which there's nothing wrong with that. I've done that several times in my career. Anybody that's a good coal miner does that.
Miners are a very proud people. They're no different. They're like a lot of people. They're very competitive. They're very spirited. That was a very common thing among mines to boast that you were the highest producing longwall mine in the country.
They had to bring extra people because we were mining faster than they could keep up with. The crib line had to be adjacent to the face, so we had to keep people to keep that crib line up in front of the face.
Some of the people off 13th Right would have provided extra support.
The other longwall, of course, down 13th Right was down. And so I would run back and forth, make sure everything was going well. And I could see that the other one was just going like mad. The continuous miners were doing well. The longwall was doing extremely well.
On this particular day, there were 28 people on the section.
And so as I went to go by the mine manager's office that night, the room was full of a lot of the senior people. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" Vic said, "We're really having a great run." And he said, "We want to go cheer on the crew. And we're gonna give them our congratulations as well." It was an unusual circumstance and quite unordinary.
Well, I was a shift foreman on days. Dick Cox was a shift foreman on afternoons. And so Dick was on shift at the time of the fire.
Got a call from 13th Right that longwall was about to start. And they asked me to go down there and tell them not to go too heavy so they wouldn't have so much coal on the belt. That's when the power went off.
It was around, 6:30, 7 o'clock. Dick Cox, who was the afternoon shift foreman, comes in and he comes to the pan line, and of course we have raised the pan line. We're working underneath it. And I says, "It won't be long now." I want to say we lost power at that time. And he says, "I've got to go see what the heck's going on." I had the head gateman call me and says, "Hey, you've got to come to the phone. It's important." So that's the first time I find out that we've got, an incident in the mine. We've got to evacuate the people.
And then I went back to 5th Right, went up on the intake. As soon as I got there and could see the smoke, I knew something that was wrong.
And I make the corner and come down the end of the section. There's just a heck of a lot of smoke, and I'm looking at the overcast, and Dick Cox is standing just out by, and that's all he can say is, "Fire's out of control. The The men are in the section. That's the first time that I know that the men are still in the section. He says, and power's off, we have no water.
When you have a mine emergency situation and there's a possibility of explosive gases, you need to cut off the electrical power into those areas. And you try to maintain ventilation, especially in the escape ways. Provision should have been made to keep electrical power to the pumps, especially for firefighting.
And I got a call from the mine, said we got a fire on the long wall. We got people behind it and we haven't heard from them since the fire. I said, well, I'm on my way. I told my wife, I said, we're in trouble because I know the long wall tailgate's closed. We'd had a roof fall and there was a route out through the bleeders, but it was not the ideal situation that we would have liked.
In the conditions that were mined in Utah, having a block tailgate or having a bleeder that may have had a KE or a floor heave wasn't all that uncommon. You could find ways to deal with that.
In 6th Right, as the roof had crushed, you know, from the longwall, it had been the head gate right for the previous longwall, and so the weight had really crushed the cribs. The roof had spalled, and the roof or the floor had heaved. Between 5th Right and 6th Right, there was what they called a squeeze area. Anyone coming up to that would just decide that it wasn't passable. Earlier that evening, Kenny Valdez and I think Gilbert Madrid and one other individual, they went together, the three of them. They couldn't get through. So they found a tag and they dated and tagged and initialed where they were at and what time they were there.
Kenny Blake was the only one that we could account for that was out and had been involved in the fire, didn't really know where he'd been.
I was standing about 10 shields down the face from the head gate, and the pan line shut off. So I walked up to the corner to ask the cornerman, why did you shut the pan line off? Because I didn't know if something had broke or what, and I needed to go down the face or what. So he said, well, somebody called in here and mentioned smoke. And I looked around and it looked a little bit smoky, and I thought it looked like just exhaust off the muckers. Hauling cribs up, you got exhaust, diesel exhaust and stuff coming off those muckers. Well, at that time, the guy, this coordinator that I'm talking about, dropped the phone and hollered to the head gate. He said, get the people off the tailgate and out the belt line. He said, there's a fire in the intake. I was going to go down and grab as many rescuers as I could find and carry them up to the corner so those people didn't have to come clear off the face, go down the intake, and then back up and around. We had a cache at the tailgate of the longwall, and we had a cache at the kitchen, and then we had caches on both man trips. They had maps. They'd mark the maps, tell everybody where the caches were. When I got down there, I couldn't see. I mean, I run into smoke and I couldn't see. I got almost to the power center. I could hear the power center humming, but I couldn't really see it. So I was kind of feeling my way down, and two guys come walking up the entry, and they had two rescuers each. And they didn't have their rescuers on, and I didn't have one either. And so the one guy says, here, I got these rescuers, and he handed them to me, and I said, well, let's put them on now. So we knelt down, and all three of us put a rescuer on. I said, okay, let's head out the belt line. And they said, well, we don't know where to go. So I'm assuming they were part of the cribbing crew. And they said, well, you follow me, and I'll get you to the belt line, and then you go straight down the belt line. So now head straight down this, just keep your hand on the belt rails or whatever, and follow this belt line down. And I went first. And then I never did see him again. I kept mine on a 4-inch water line, the pipe that was tied to the belt structure. Well, when I got to the belt line, there was a bunch of people were sitting on a lip. Jim Bartuzzi, I believe it was. And he told me, he says, we can't get out the belt line because it's hot on the other side of the door. And I opened the door and just stuck my hand through, and you could feel the heat coming through there. So he knew there was a fire there. I told him that was, you got an hour's worth of oxygen. We've already used 20, 30 minutes of it, you know, we better do something. And there was an older gentleman there, and he says, well, follow me, and he ducked underneath the belt line. So I followed him, and we were in a crosscut that they had basically cut, and what it was a regulator for the belt air. And I lost him in there. I didn't know where anybody was. And so I was just basically wandering around in there by myself. And I kept walking into timbers and hitting them with my cheek. I scraped all the skin off my cheek because I kept walking right into them because I couldn't see them. But what I was looking for was stoppings. And I'd find a stopping and I'd paw that whole stopping trying to see if there was a man door in it. And I found a door in the stopping at the very end. I walked probably 100 feet and I could hear the fire. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. You could just hear it roaring. So I thought, I can't go this way. So I turned around and went back against the air. And I kind of looked like clouds coming instead of solid smoke. I kept walking, and finally I passed a point where I could see the smoke coming around a corner, and then I knew where I was. I was at the return of the longwall, where the longwall air was dumping into the main return. There was a door in that one. I went out that door. I looked down the entry, and I saw this guy dragging a hose. And so I helped him drag this hose down to where they were going. And I asked him if anyone else had come out of the longwall, and he said, I haven't seen anybody. I said, do they know outside what's going on here?
Got a call about, I don't know, must have been 6, 7 o'clock that night. Told me they had a fire. I got on the phone, called Kevin, and then I went and picked him up, and we went to the mine.
Things just start racing through your mind. How big's the fire? Is anybody in there? Are they trapped? What's going on? When we first got there, we went up the elevator, and things were black, kind of chaos. Nobody knew what really was going on.
I could see some smoke and I could smell some smoke as I got close to the mine.
It was a totally different smoke coming out of there, and it was a scary smoke. It was bad. I knew it was bad.
Ray had called out all the mine rescue team members. He informed us that we actually had miners that were in by, that were the miners that were actually unaccounted for, and that we needed to get in there and see what we could do to contain the fire and get to the people.
The night of December 19th at about 10 o'clock p.m., I received a phone call from a man named Ray Guyman, and probably for the rest of my life I'll remember what he said. He said that he says there's been a fire at the Wilberg coal mine. He says there's people trapped, and he says you need to get here as fast as you can.
John called. There's a problem over at Wilberg. He says, but this time a lot of people are involved.
I remember getting to the mine, and it was pretty chaotic. You always believe that somebody's alive until you know differently. There's thoughts going through your mind about all the things you know could possibly happen. And so during all of that time, we worked with the belief that we were going to rescue these people.
Dave Larisky, and he called me that night and said, we've got a major problem, we've got a fire, we've got 28 people missing. And he says, can you come over?
I was in not long after midnight that night. You know, it was a struggle to find a razor, right? I didn't even think about it. I went up to the mine and had a beard, so I had to scrounge for, these old discarded razors and, take the scissors, get the beard off, get on apparatus, go underground, and start fighting fire.
A lot of the coal miners were still coming out of the mine, and the ones that didn't want to stay and help, and they wasn't wanting people to go in until they knew who was in and who was out.
It was pretty chaotic when we got there, and we were probably there an hour before we actually got direction as to what we were going to be doing.
The night of the fire, we lost the senior mine management at the mine, as well as the senior mine production man in the main office. There was not a lot of people that knew much about mine fires.
Now you have to figure out who is going to have that charge and who has to make those decisions.
And we did try to set up what we called a command center, where decisions were made as to who would go underground. The teams were trained to get themselves ready, but it was difficult just making sure you had transportation for the teams.
We had several mine rescue teams that come from Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada. New Mexico, I know a New Mexico team was there, but yeah, there was over 30 teams.
We established the command center in an office right across from MSHA's office. They had taken the mine manager's office. The other big coordination effort that needed to go on at the time was material coordination for underground to get supplies to these people.
The support people, I just can't say enough about how important they are. Purchasing people, they were all over trying to get materials. If you don't have materials coming, you're sunk in the water.
So you had all this communication coming into you, and you were trying to build plans around what you were learning. And that included making sure that you had enough resources, enough mine rescue people, that you had enough oxygen tanks, that you had all the things you needed to have. And so all of those things were going on.
A fresh air base is established at the point where conditions no longer permit barefaced exploration. In other words, where the atmosphere is bad. Anytime a team goes in by the fresh air base, we always have a backup team so that there is help immediately available.
Because our fresh air base was actually in by the fire. So to get to the fresh air base, you went actually in past where the fire was, turned and then came back to it 3 or 4 entries over.
Worried me a lot that we had people in by that fire fighting the fire. And the reason they were working so hard is to keep the fire from breaching into the intake that was out by us.
Well, they had men out by that were installing temporary curtains on the intake. And once all of the temporary curtains out of Bradish cloth were installed, then they started to erect steel stoppings. That provided us a fairly safe alternate escape way because we were in by the fire.
And my team was responsible to kind of stay at that fresh air base and attack that fire where you could, so it didn't burn through and cut off that access.
We had a constant communication with the fresh air base by mine telephone. We put a redundant system in so that we had, in case we lost communication on one phone, we had another phone that we could reach the fresh air base. We made sure that we had a mine map or mine maps at the fresh air base, and then as we would send teams into the mine, they would make notes on those maps of any conditions or things that they found, especially any bodies or people they might encounter.
We did some things that, thinking about it, shouldn't have been done. But given the same situation, I would have done it again. You know, because my focus was on rescuing my friends, my brothers that work. You know, so yeah, I took a calculated risk.
2 people came to me and wanted to explore the 6th right from their fresh air base. And they wanted to do it by themselves with apparatus, and one of them had a beard. And I told him he couldn't do it as long as he had the beard. But for some reason, I relented.
Kenny Valdez and Daniel Brink took it upon themselves to take 2 mine rescue apparatus and explore 6th right. They explored into Crosscut 13, if I remember right, where they had a cave in the tailgate. At that time, they turned and retreated back out towards the fresh air base. When they got to crosscut number 8, Brink went down. He ran out of oxygen.
So I remember putting the apparatus and crawling my way over and to the corner of the long wall when the gentleman I was with hollers that we have smoke at our back. He's, you know, he says we're trapped. He'd put an apparatus on. He had a rather large beard, and he'd taken in some bad air. And so I says, okay. I says, we're getting out of here. We get within, The last 500 foot, and he finally goes down. Holy crap, he collapses. We really shouldn't have been there to begin with.
And they'd already been in fighting the fire for quite a while with no apparatus on at all. They had all sucked a lot of CO in, and carbon monoxide doesn't get out of your system very fast.
Kenny had to try to pick him up and get him going. He couldn't get him going. He turned and literally ran back to the fresh air base as fast as he could. He grabbed the 3 guys that were there, mine rescue apparatus. They went back in the tailgate, back to crosscut number 8, which is 800 feet. And Gilbert Madrid was the individual that took his apparatus off and give it to Brink. So they were sharing 3 apparatus amongst 4 men to get him back out of that tailgate entry.
Dan Brinks was on the ground unconscious, and he was wearing a Dregger unit, BG-174, and his face mask was off, and I could see he had a full beard on. So I figured we were in CO, and there was Gilbert Madrid was there. He was just trying to revive him.
He had decided that he was going to buddy breathe with this individual that had gone down.
And we took off on a run and drug him back out to the fresh air base. And when we got to the stopping and went through opened the door, there was another team there of, I think they was from Kaiser. There was about 6 or 7 of them, and they came through, and they went up and got Dan Brinks and brought him out.
They was all in bad shape with carbon monoxide. We loaded the guys up and actually did CPR on the one guy all the way out. And so as soon as we came out, they took them and took them to the hospital. They all survived.
It was amazing that the 2 individuals made it back out of there the way they did, especially Brink.
We truly thought we were going to lose him. And that was a tough deal for me because that was my decision to let that happen. And it was counter to everything that I knew.
There was a lot of people that was trying to fight the fire. Those people only had the regular self-rescuers on.
I was under apparatus when I went in the first time. There were several people there fighting the fire with no breathing apparatus at all. I was telling some of them, you guys need to get out of here. The air's not good. If it caves, you're in trouble. And they pretty much said, no, we're gonna stay here. We're gonna get our brothers that are in there. We're gonna save them.
Usually it's when we're under apparatus, we have almost 4 hours of oxygen. The weight of the apparatus on the BG-174s are about 50 pounds. And over time, they do get heavy.
There was times I wouldn't even take my apparatus off. They'd just change the bottle in the canister and I'd go right back in.
Once we got into the 5th right return, there was, initially we run into light smoke, but as we got closer to the mouth of the 5th right section, the smoke got denser and denser and denser, and there was a cave in the intake, and people were actually at the edge of this cave fighting the fire. You could actually see flames.
We were making good headway. We were putting the fire out, but more guys were showing up all the time from different mines, different team members. I was in the belt line fighting the fire, and it looked we were gaining, putting the fire out, and all of a sudden the hose went limp, lost all water pressure. And I stood in front of a cinder block stopping, and it got red and then just burned out. And things got worse and worse and worse.
After losing the water, we took a giant step backwards, because what happened is everything we had pretty much cooled down, had kind of rekindled.
The pipelines that were going, some of them up the return, were made of fiberglass. And so when they restarted the pumps, the water wasn't getting into where we needed it to get, because those fiberglass pipes had melted enough that they wouldn't hold water anymore. So there was a lot of crews that was also out in the intake, actually putting in a new 6-inch aluminum line up the intake to get water back into where we needed it.
And of course, when you lose a water line, then you lose valuable time, and the fan is running the whole time. So the fire's being provided with ventilation and oxygen and at a very high volume.
We were fighting the fire in the return. Just intense, intense heat. Couldn't get close enough to the fire. The water was dripping off the roof in that entry, and it was super heated. I remember the water dripping down the back of my neck.
The heat was so bad that it almost felt like the rubber on your mask was just going to run off your face.
Using water directly on a fire has positive and negative consequences. It does cool the fire and it does help to put it out, but in a fire that hot, it breaks the water down to its chemical composition, which is H2O. The problem is that H is hydrogen, which also makes the flammability and the explosibility of that fire area go sky high.
The hydrogen would form, and it would form near the roof, and it would ignite, because we had enough people on teams that would say duck, and the flame would shoot right over your head.
We had the fire out and we were going, and I felt heat on my neck. I turned around and we had flames behind us. So we had flames in front of us and behind us, and we were in the middle. And a fireball went across, and the whole in front of us started on fire again. So then we had to start all over and make our way forward again.
We were near one of the overcasts that had burned out, and it was unbelievable, the heat and the cold blowing out over the top.
And so Ray and I went back down there, and I was just a little horrified because we could see fire, little flames of fire lapping up around the overcast. So what that told me was we had 1,000 foot of return on fire.
We had a hole through the overcast, and we had hoses going through there. It was so intense that you had to wrap your hands with wet rags so that the steam didn't burn your hands.
We were rebuilding stoppings and pumping rock dust, foam generators, water, and everything we could get to get into fire. If there was any little pinhole or anything in a stopping, it would glow red around that because the gas is coming right there to get the oxygen. And so we were having to go in and put new stoppings in front of the old ones.
We set foam generators up in the number 6 entry, about crosscut 38. We were creating a foam plug, and that foam plug was pushing towards 5th right and above 5th. It was pushing the smoke away and the flames away.
We hadn't trained with foam. It was kind of a new thing. A couple 100 feet downwind of where our foam machine got set up, they actually got a rock duster set up also, because as the foam would come by the rock dusting machine, the rock dust just knocks the foam down. The rock dusting machine should have been shut off.
We never did get it controlled. We was in a fuel-rich fire. At one time, we was burning probably 3 tons of coal in a minute. You know, there's no way you can control that type of fire with water hoses.
Every fire is different. Just like every person is different. It has its own personality. And I came out of the mine one time and I was covered with, I think it's called creosote. It's a byproduct of the coal and everything that's burning. And it turns your skin black and burns it. This one lady, news person, asked me what the fire was like. So I asked her, have you ever been to hell?
The majority of that time was under apparatus. You weren't thinking about how tired you were.
We were essentially there most all of that time. And of course, you can only work so long and you have to come out for rest. We had some cots and that set up in the warehouse that was just down the road from the mine.
I was tired like everybody else, but we were running on adrenaline, I think, you know what I mean? People didn't want to quit.
You know, we lived on adrenaline for quite a few days. I dropped one apparatus off and they had benchmen working there. All I remember was trusting them with my life.
My job, of course, was to get every apparatus ready to go. I tore them apart to clean them and then began to test the equipment, make sure it passed every test that was required for it to be ready to go again.
There were teams exploring as the fire was being fought by other mine rescue teams. The problem was with the fire that the smoke and everything was so bad that you couldn't see a lot.
Normally you would go with your own team, but if you have a team that's not familiar with the workings of the mine, then we would send someone who was.
Your safety is the first thing in their mind. I knew that my safety was still number one. It came before their mine. And that's very comforting thought.
We had a lot of mine rescue teams in there, and they stayed and fought that fire. I think it was some of the greatest heroism of people to risk their lives to try to save other men's lives.
I didn't have a map of the mouth of that section. The dogleg opening was there. We actually advanced past that and fought a fire past that for several hours. The smoke in the return got lighter, and one of the teams noticed the dogleg, and it was like, wait a minute, here's the dogleg. We can get in here.
We got asked to go over into the return and see how far down the return we could make it. We got down to a doorway that was right across from the dogleg coming out of the section. So we was close to, actually really close to where a lot of the first ones that we found dead were found.
My team was the first team to advance into the fifth right section, and we found the first 9 bodies in that dogleg. I was 34 years old. I'd never seen that many dead people at one time in my life. It was something that you knew that was going to happen. Seeing what we were in, knowing what they were in, you knew they weren't coming out of there alive.
They sent me in there to find out who they was. And as I walked in there, I knew them all.
A memory that'll stick with me for the rest of my life. Some of the earlier teams had found about 9 bodies in that dogleg, and as we would come and go back in there looking for other bodies and other people, we would have to continue to step over those bodies.
I was on the team that actually made it across the longwall face, and there was several bodies laying there. And those guys, I don't think they had a chance at all. They didn't have time to put the rescuers on or anything like that. The smoke, the CO hit them real fast.
I remember vividly that as we got into making our way into the section, and it had cleared, the smoke had cleared a little bit, but I saw a white reflector which looked like somebody with their cap lamp indicating come. Unfortunately, as we got closer, we realized that what it was. We continued up into the section and started finding bodies. We found all of them but 2. Of the 2 that we didn't find anywhere in the section was Jim Bertuzzi and Gordon Conover, and Gordon Conover was my nephew.
We had started the process of starting to recover some of the bodies back to the fresh air base we'd established in the area back there. The fire at that time had continued to work its way out of the mine. And it got to a point to where it was just too dangerous to have people in the mine.
We were in by the fire the whole time. And we all knew that if the fire burnt through the stoppings between the belt entry and the intake, we were trapped. On December 22nd, that happened.
I had gone through a man door into the return to look at that area. That in itself short-circuited the air enough that I felt like somebody had put their hand on the back of my neck. And it was like a branding iron to a torch. It was so hot. And it caused me to quickly jump back into the neutral air. And just as I did, I won't say exploded, it ignited. And I was come really close to being burned. At that point, you could see the smoke that was in the entries pulsating. It would go 20, 30 feet down, and then you'd hear kind of a bellow, and it'd come back again, and you'd see these surges. The mine was probably getting ready to blow.
On Main West, a stopping, well, it turned red, and then we watched it, it just went out, and that short-circuited the air and caused their recorders at the fan to show that enough gases and stuff back there that there could be an explosion, and that's when they evacuated us off the hill.
I lost contact with the mine rescue team. And that team was being led at the time by Kevin Tuttle and Curtis Steele. We had one of the men monitoring the fan that come racing into the control room down the hallway and racing and saying, "It's gonna blow, it's gonna blow."
We had MSHA on site, they were analyzing. We had a guy that was analyzing, you know, the explosive nature of the gases in the return air. And so they said, you know, there's potential for explosion. We need to get out of here. So we were under a K order. When they said leave, we had to leave.
We got those guys and got outside, got everybody out of the mine. And the chaos that had happened at the first of the mine was nothing compared to the chaos that was going on.
There were a lot of people that didn't want to leave at that time, but you have to make the call to get them out. And eventually they would have been trapped had they stayed.
You know, we knew where the victims were, and you don't want to send people into harm's way to recover victims. And I made that decision, so we left. Went outside. That's the first time I'd been outside, and it was bright, sunshiny. There was 18 inches of snow, and it was black as black. It reminded me of the last days of Pompeii, where the ash was falling out of the air and the whole canyon was black.
Chaos was the word of the day on the day that the mine had to be evacuated. And some people acted calm, and some people acted frantic, and some people were completely out of control.
But you saw all kinds of sights. There was also a concrete chute that we used for trash that we dumped off of that. There was a 2-inch rubber hose that was attached to that. People were grabbing that and rappelling off the garbage chute. They weren't fully clothed, or they had blankets wrapped around them.
They had told us at the warehouse that they were afraid the mine was going to blow, and so that they were bringing everyone down from the mine. But they made everybody stay outside so that we could check and make sure that everybody was off the mountain. And so those poor people were out there, and I mean, all this weather, it was horribly cold.
I think I was the last one to leave. We headed off the hill and walked down towards the parking lot. And I told Art Bruno, who was the manager of maintenance for Energy West, and I says, we need to get that fan shut down, or we're not going to gain a whole lot. And Art says, he says, if we can get in the substation, I'll kill the power.
Morgan and I actually boosted him over an 8-foot chain link fence. He ran to try and shut all the breakers off in the sub, cut all power to the mine. I'll never forget the haunting sound of the diesel backup for the fan kicking on. This diesel backup had been a problem. It never came on when you wanted it to, but that day it came on, and the fan started back up, belching the black smoke.
MSHA would not allow anybody back on the property, or at least for the time being, because of the possibility of an explosion.
They come up with the plan to shoot out the radiator. And one of the local guys, he had his deer rifle in the back of his truck. And so they ended up taking him in the helicopter. He shot out the radiator. The fan overheated and seized up and stopped running.
Once you'd done that, then the fire went back to being fuel rich. You didn't have the flames, and you wasn't having all the real damage. That probably saved the mine.
Well, it was sad. It was discouraging because you couldn't find anybody. They tried as hard as they could to rescue people.
Everybody was just devastated, you know what I mean? Almost heartbroken. We were defeated, you know. Worked so hard for so many days, and there's time that it still troubles me to this day, you know. And that's been, what, 31 years almost.
I remember waking up that next morning with being heart sick. Because I look up to the mine to know now you're going to seal the mine with people in it.
And I know all these people, you know, and they were great guys. You never forget. You put it aside, but you never forget. December's never been the same.
It haunted me. I guess it still does in some ways. I was worried about getting home for Christmas. Then I realized that there were men in that mine that wanted to be home with their families too.
I'd lost everybody, primarily everybody that was senior to me. I'd lost a longwall crew that I'd supervised. No other Christmas has been like that.
It was such a dark time. It was the Christmas season, 27 families without a family member. It should have been a joyous time, but it wasn't.
When there is a mining disaster, the families, they band together. It concerns everybody, and everybody pulls together. You found out who lost their lives pretty much when it was all done, when they could do no more. It impacts the community immensely. Whether you know the family or personally or whether you don't, they're miners. From Price to Orangeville to Emery, Castledale, every community was on edge. Everyone was praying. Everybody was wanting these miners to make a home for the holiday. It was someone's father, someone's son, someone's husband, someone's daughter. Yes, yes.
It was a rough time, and it was a rough time for a long time after, you know.
So you take a mine that at that time I think I had about 500 or 600 employees, and nobody's working. The whole area was devastated.
You gotta remember, you have a wife and family sitting at home that's worried every second you're gone. Our families knew that we was on a mine rescue team, that we would be probably called to some of those things. They worried for us, but they knew we had to go.
It's very frightening. You are very concerned because your husband is going into a place that is hell on earth, basically, when it's on fire. However, you're also very proud that they have the courage to do so. And if it was my family trapped in that mine, I would be thanking Almighty God for the men that have the courage and the dignity to do that.
The fire started on the 19th. People didn't really know for sure that everybody was dead until the 22nd or the 23rd, I believe. And so what a terrible way to go into Christmas. And
when it becomes obvious that they're not surviving and that all hope is lost, it's a time where you pull from reserves that you don't know you have. You join together, you comfort, support those who have lost someone.
So after we evacuated the mine, the efforts then turned to being able to take the oxygen completely away from the fire. And in order for us to do that, we had to seal the mine.
When we put a mine sealing plan together, I knew that if you walked away from this, we'd probably lose the mine forever.
In fact, I think it was around February 7th, we got approval to breach the seals to go back in. That was a pretty intense day because you just weren't sure what you were going to go into.
The heat from the fire had caused a lot of damage, caves, unstable conditions, ribs. There were places that we weren't able to access at all because of the damage. We just weren't able to access the original entries, so we had to make other entries to get around the fire area. It took about a year from the time the mine was sealed until we were able to break in and recover the bodies out of the mine.
What was it like to go back in there? Well, it was like going back into what you might think hell would be like. Of course, everything was completely smoked up, almost to the point that smoke and dust and soot had covered all the surfaces to where it would just absorb all the light from your mine light.
A lot of times when the fire went through, it didn't do a lot of damage, except that it made the top coal pop off the roof. Sometimes it would be hot enough that it would actually try and catch on fire again.
There was always concern that the fire would come back after the ventilation was restored.
Through that year-long process, through that recovery, we learned what hard work was. I have never even since worked that hard. So it wasn't just about production, it was about we need to get to this location so we can recover those bodies.
There were 6 teams of us. We were under apparatus quite a bit of that time. We'd advance and build temporary stoppings with bradish and lattice, filter the air in, and we couldn't drive the vehicles into that way. It was all hand packing until we got the air established into that section.
The company had support teams, and a lot of people would come in and do all the roof bolting and the cleanup and the re-support and the re-ventilation, building new stoppings.
What's pretty amazing about that whole thing is there wasn't a single person that got seriously injured. No lost time accidents. And there were some pretty nasty, there were some very nasty things that, that they went through.
It was hard all through that time. During the memorial, when they dedicate that Wilberg Memorial, my friend Bert's son was there. He was probably about 6, 7 years old, I think. And he just, pointed to the mountain and said, "My dad ain't here. He's stuck in that damn mountain."
It wasn't just going back and starting the mine up and moving on like if you just had a fire. There was a driving force there to get back in there, because we had people still left in there we had to get. We were just not whole until that was taken care of.
There were guys that they found in that dog leg, the first bunch they found. They told me that they was all had their mine rescues there, but they didn't have them in their mouth. I just presumed maybe, they figured they were safe there.
It took almost a year to find the last 2. And we didn't have any idea where they were. They could have been under a cave somewhere. We may have missed them on the way in. And my team got to the tailgate, and within about a 15-minute period, my team found the one individual, and Team 4 found the other individual in the bleeder.
Jim Bertuzzi and Gordon Conover were at 2 very distant or separated locations. Jim Bertuzzi tried to make his way out the tailgate, and the conditions were bad because the roof had crushed, from the longwall. It was just really impassable.
When we found Gordon Conover, he made it through that area, which none of us could make it through it. So how he made it through it, I don't know. The will to live, and he had done everything right, and he had taken his self-rescuer off, put another one over around his neck, so he dropped it on the ground. He'd never put it in his mouth. I'm sure he thought he was in clear air.
Because I was involved in the training of a lot of these individuals, you had hoped that they had used that training. I used to tell them that once you decided that the time was to put one on, there was only a couple times that it would come off. You were unconscious and it fell out of your mouth, or you were changing from one to another for a refresh, or you were outside and you're looking at clear blue sky.
It's pretty sad seeing something like that he had made it. He'd made it through it. If he would have kept walking, he knew his way out.
My guess is he got in the air that looked clear, thought he would save it and use it when he got in some bad air again, not remembering that carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. So he fell unconscious and to his death with a life-saving device at his side. It cost him.
And it appeared that he had just sat down to rest. And like Kenny Blake said, if you sit down, that's where they'll find you.
We were told that actually it was a compressor station where the fire originated, and that was the main cause of the fire.
Right at the mouth of the section from the main line, the belt line, there was a compressor that was in by a couple cross cuts, and that's where the fire started. And because the air went in by and past the compressor, and then it turned and went up into the fifth right section, carrying the smoke right into the section, into the crew of men.
Yeah, somebody turned the compressor on accidentally and it run for 2 or 3 days. That shouldn't have happened.
I mean, we were able to determine the length that that compressor ran unattended, unchecked. Well, people didn't know it was running. There's a Bradish in front of it, no stopping. You were driving by it. Well, you hear sounds in coal mines all the time. I mean, so now you have all these events and all these stars lining up, and the air hit the oil hits the air, and it spews onto the roof, it spews onto the coal walls, and you have ventilation now. It's the perfect scenario for a very catastrophic fire.
Today, I think mining is safer because of those events that you learn from. It's a sad situation, but if you learn from it and can prevent one from happening in the future, then the job got done.
Make sure you have a good up-to-date map and know the escape ways out of there right off the bat. If the guys that died in the fire knew their escape ways, knew where their self-rescuers were, they would have made it out.
My biggest thing is always be aware of your surroundings, everything that's going on around you. Keep your eye on the roof, keep your eye on the ribs, know who's there with you, who's not there with you, and pay attention and remember your training.
After the Wilberg disaster, federal law now requires that there be a lifeline run from the working sections to the surface. There are different shapes on it that show you where self-rescue storage stations are, where refuge chambers are that you can get to if you need to, and the cones point a certain direction so that they can show you the way out of the mine. So,
CO travels in advance of the smoke. Put your SCSR on at the first indication of a fire. Do not wait for smoke.
You don't wait for your boss, you don't wait for anybody else to tell you to put your rescuer on. If you feel threatened, you put your rescuer on.
But there were people who were wearing their rescuers, but not their goggles. You know, if you don't wear your goggles, you get carbon monoxide in those ducts in your eyes. Carbon monoxide poisoning is accumulative. It's not something that comes and goes. It builds up in your system. The carbon monoxide gloms onto the hemoglobin and uses it all up. You have no oxygen carrying capacity, you're done.
When someone goes down, there's really nothing you can do for them. For whatever reason that they went down and their life expired, another life expiring because you tried to help that one really doesn't solve anything. Now, that's easy for me to say. That's very difficult to probably deal with. I would have a very difficult time leaving someone behind.
So there was massive new efforts to improve training, not only here, but all over the industry. Now, all of a sudden, everybody had to put their hands on the rescuers.
When you're in a situation like that, if you're in smoke, if you're disoriented, if you're scared, it's got to be automatic. The new training now is you do it in dark.
The overcasts that separated the belt, the return, and the intake air were made of aluminum. They failed very quickly. We got rid of all the aluminum lines, for example. We did away with aluminum overcasts.
And we were also using some collapsible tubing to ventilate transformer stations and things of that nature, and that's not allowed anymore because it melted. Almost instantly it melted and not permit that flexible tubing anymore to be used.
There is a lot of people with a lot of experience that will be retiring. It's going to have a big impact.
Pay attention to your old timers.
I was one of those kids that were 10 foot tall and bulletproof, but when it comes to mining and when it comes to seeing and knowing the dangers, there's a vast reservoir of knowledge there that you need to tap into as quickly as you can and get that out of them before they retire so that that you will be a safer miner.
When you're in the mine, you need to protect yourself. You need to be on alert everywhere you go. You have to slow down and take 5 minutes, and you need to think about the job you're doing. You know, soak in all the training, pay attention, make sure you know what you're doing, and hope that you never have to use it.
The first thing I'd say to mine rescue teams is take it serious. Take that training serious, learn all aspects of it, because you never know when you're going to be asked to respond.
But still, your safety is in your hands, so keep yourself safe. It's fun to work in a coal mine if you don't get hurt, and the way to not get hurt is know what you're doing.
You need to eat, think, and sleep safety when you're in the underground mine. I mean, expect the unexpected. If you think about what can possibly go wrong and plan for it, then you can prevent it.
A very wise man, and he's a friend of mine. He's passed. He says, Gilbert, learn to listen and listen to learn. And if you can do that, you will not have a problem in life.
Yeah, listen to your trainers, listen to the experienced people, and don't take any chances. Ask somebody, because if you don't, you might get hurt. Injuries in the mine are serious. Sometimes they take your life.
Just be the best you can all the time and follow the rules all the time, not when it's convenient for you, because I think that's when people, their minds go astray and things happen.
Do your best to pick a good company that expects people to be safe and work safely. Safety is good for the business. You know, it's not a good thing when people get hurt and people get killed.
We never learn anything from production and great accomplishments. We learn from the hard things in life, and we get better from that.
Going home to your family at night's the most important part about coal mining.
He says every day you enter that portal, you know you're going in, but you never know if you're coming out. If you're trained, it's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you. And if I have anything to say to these young people, pay attention.
Do things right. Watch yourself. Watch your fellow employee. If you see somebody doing something wrong, don't be afraid to say, hey, that's my life you're jeopardizing. Let's do it the right way.
You do gotta learn to take care of yourself and be safety conscious. You want to be able to go home and whole or not come home at all. And you don't want to hurt somebody else.
That's what a miner's life's about, you know. You mine together, you work together, and if something happens, you fight like hell together.